Good morning, yogis. So, as a lot of you probably know, we've been doing a mental health awareness campaign this week. And the reason we're doing that, there's many. I mean, it's really important to talk about and destigmatize mental health and help people find help. But I was particularly inspired to do this because I myself, over the last 6 or 7 years, have been battling severe OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And I finally got treatment for it about a year and a half ago. And I would consider myself on the path of recovery. But I'm really, like, in my soul, feel it's time to share my story to help others and inspire others to get help. And it's like kind of terrifying to share, but I know that it's an important step in my healing, and like I said, I really want to be able to help others because I definitely endured a lot of suffering unnecessarily. So first of all, people might be wondering, oh, I just see Darcy joined. She's my dear friend, and she's actually been a major support for me through my OCD. So hi, Darcy. Anyhow, so first of all, I just want to establish what obsessive compulsive disorder is. I think a lot of people think that OCD is, people want things to be clean and tidy and neat and orderly, and that's certainly one variety of OCD, but there's actually so many different forms that obsessive compulsive disorder can take, and it's estimated that, I don't know, I've seen numbers from 1 in every 40 people to 1 in every 100 people, but definitely in the span of your day, you're running across people who have obsessive compulsive disorder, but we're really good at hiding it. So you would probably never know unless somebody told you. So, for me personally, my style of OCD is considered contamination. So my mind can get set on wanting to avoid something that I think could be contaminated, and my compulsive behavior is avoiding things or washing hands and things like that. So that's one type of OCD, but there's also what they call pure O, which is where people are just, their whole obsessive compulsive disorder cycle takes place in their head, and they just have these major obsessive fits within their mind. There's just right OCD, where, for instance, let's say a child that had just right OCD would be leaving the house for school and saying goodbye to their parents, and their parents say, have a good day, and they feel like the parent didn't say it just right. So they need the parent to say it again, just right. And then it doesn't sound right the next time. So you just get into this cycle of getting the parent to do it over and over again until it finally feels just right, which can be hard to reach that point. There's, let me look at my little list here that I created. So, scrupulosity OCD. There's perfectionism OCD. Scrupulosity OCD is based around religion and God, and did I do something wrong? And, so there's just so many different varieties that OCD takes. So I think people, are familiar with this idea of things need to be color-coded or alphabetized or clean and perfect, but there's a lot of different styles and flavors to OCD. So, just to kind of give a glimpse of what a day in the life of somebody that has OCD, or maybe, I guess, how it starts and builds, and the level of suffering that it can reach. Just to give an example, let's say I was in the grocery store and there was a magazine at the checkout. One time my mind might say to me, oh, that headline makes me uncomfortable. Maybe it was a topic I was already a little bit uncomfortable with, but and the OCD says, let's go to a different checkout stand, because that, maybe I look for one that doesn't have magazines at the checkout stand. So there I just avoided something that bothers me. And what happens with OCD a lot of times, it happens at the beginning, these little behaviors that are so quiet and so subtle, that you don't realize that it's even happening. And then at the point that you realize it's happening, this little cycle, I'm obsessed in my mind about whatever is on the headline of that magazine, and my compulsion is to avoid it by going to another line. And so, yeah, there's a point that you just don't even realize that you've reinforced this cycle that happens. And then at that point, it becomes difficult to stop. And, it's possible, but the longer it goes, it kind of just gets more and more ingrained, and becomes harder to stop those behaviors. So, and it quickly can spiral out of control. So that visit to the grocery store, you avoid that checkout line, but then the next time, maybe you avoid even walking in that part of the store. And then maybe you see somebody carrying that magazine down a certain aisle, and you don't want to walk down the aisle anymore. And then eventually, you don't even want to go to that grocery store anymore. You got to find a whole new grocery store to go to. And, there's just these behaviors that just get reinforced, and your world just starts to kind of shrink up on you, and you're avoiding so many things. And then beyond that, let's say your spouse was at that grocery store earlier that day and picked up that magazine and brought it home. Oh, crap. Now that trigger is in your house, and maybe you throw the magazine away. Now you're avoiding the garbage can that it's in. You've got to wipe down the table that magazine was on, then wash your hands. But did you wash your hands perfectly? You might have missed a spot, so I think we need to wash our hands again. And no, I didn't do it right that time, so I've got to wash them again. And you can quickly just get in this downward spiral where you're giving so much of your time and energy to obsessive compulsive disorder. So I think a lot of people probably have the impression that it's a little quirky and maybe it doesn't affect your life that much. You just like things neat and tidy, but actually it can cause immense suffering, and people can end up where they are spending their entire day just doing compulsions to avoid that unpleasant trigger or to mitigate. Because what OCD tells you is, hey, that magazine made you uncomfortable, but if you wash your hands after you touch it, you'll be okay. But if you don't wash your hands after you touch it, something bad could happen to you, something bad could happen to your family. So that's kind of part of the trick that OCD plays, is it creates this fear of safety for you or your loved ones, and it plays on that fear. It makes it think that it makes you think that it's protecting you, when really it's obviously not. It can be really brutal. I mean, for me, I remember probably at the depths of my OCD, I'm easily was washing my hands, I'm sure like 40 times a day that were totally unnecessary hand washing, and spending 5 minutes each time washing my hands, probably taking 2 to 3 showers a day. The showers would last 40 minutes to an hour, because you would do it, then you would screw something up, and you'd have to redo it, and it always had to be done perfectly. And so, it's physically exhausting because you're doing all these compulsions to keep safe. That's what you think you're doing, keeping yourself and your loved ones safe. So you do all these compulsions, and they take a lot of physical time and energy. And then, it's like exhausting in your head, right? To keep track of all this stuff, because I know, like, for me, it was like, one thing might be a little contaminated, it might bother me a little bit, and something else would be like really contaminated and it bothered me a lot. And my mind was always trying to keep track of this, like what's more contaminated, what's less contaminated, or and it's exhausting. You have this dialogue going on in your head all the time about how can I stay safe, how can I avoid this, and you're scanning a lot too, like, is there something in this environment that I need to be concerned about or I should be worried about? And so it's really exhausting physically, it's really exhausting mentally, and then of course spiritually it's exhausting, because it doesn't feel good to be stuck in the cycles of obsessive compulsive disorder. So the good thing about obsessive compulsive disorder is it's very treatable. And so, you know, there's some real finite tools that you can use to combat the OCD. It's hard to see through that suffering to realize that there is help, but there is. One of the main sources of treatment is something called exposure and response prevention. It's a type of cognitive behavioral therapy. So basically, you expose yourself to the thing that makes you uncomfortable, and you prevent your response, the compulsion. So you're basically exposing yourself to things that you're obsessed about and preventing the compulsion from happening. And if you have OCD and you're watching this video, you're probably like freaking out right now. Your heartbeat's going like crazy because you're like, no way in heck will I do that. And that's how I felt about it too. And I just, you know, I just kind of reached a breaking point for myself where I had to go to treatment, and so that's how I was able to overcome that resistance to going to treatment. But when you do go to treatment, you create a hierarchy of your things that bother you, and you start small. So you take small little steps, you build your confidence, and it actually doesn't take long before you realize, oh, okay, there's freedom on the other side of this, and that you realize that this tool can really work and help you. So some of the reasons that people do resist going to treatment is because I think there is a lot of shame about it. Especially OCD is a very secret illness. You know, depression, anxiety have been talked about a lot, and I think they're pretty normalized, but obsessive compulsive disorder, if you have it, it's really hard to talk about it because it kind of like re-triggers everything for you to bring it up. So I had a really hard time talking about my OCD, and learned a lot. Oh, thank you, Monica. Sorry, I just interrupted by the comment. Monica says, how brave I am. Thank you. Yeah, no, I don't remember where I was at. But, yeah, you start with small steps with your exposure and response prevention and build your way up. So, I'm not going to lie, it is an extremely terrifying process. It is, I mean, anybody who doesn't have OCD, I mean, just think about it. Take the worst things that you could think of happening, your worst nightmares, and think about having to go and expose yourself to them. It's really uncomfortable. And if you have OCD, your way of self-medicating that uncomfortable feeling was these compulsions. So in some ways it does kind of remind me of other things that are addictive, you know, and I think anyone can relate to that. You have an uncomfortable feeling and you want to make that uncomfortable feeling go away. So maybe you turn to something to drink, maybe you turn to something to eat. For people with obsessive compulsive disorder, we turn to compulsions, and they can just wildly get out of control. So yeah, let me see what else do I want to touch on here. I have my little notes down here. Another thing that's hard about finding treatment is it can be hard to find the right therapist. I actually went to, I think, about 5 or 6 therapists before I was able to get help. It's really unfortunate. A lot of therapists don't know a lot about OCD. The first therapist I went to, I started to notice things weren't right. Things that made me a little uncomfortable before were making me a lot uncomfortable. And I was avoiding things, and I was washing my hands more, and I just knew something isn't right. And I grew up in a family where there wasn't stigma about mental health, so I had no problem going to a therapist. And I distinctly remember that therapist saying, "At least you don't have OCD." And I did. That I was having the onset symptoms of OCD, so that kind of sucks, and it's hard to look back and see that, because I think I could have avoided so much suffering had that therapist recognized those OCD symptoms in me. And that's part of the reason why I'm sharing my story, because you know, the more people talk about it, the more awareness there is about it, the more people who might be having onset symptoms can realize that and go and get help for it. So and then I went to another therapist who wasn't trained in treating OCD. I went to another therapist that was able to help me with some mindfulness techniques. But, you know, I basically, a year and a half ago, started to reach a real breaking point where I just could barely function. And I just was like holding on for dear life, and was just, every day was filled with so much suffering. And this was, let's see, winter of 2016, I think. And so I just finally, well, that's the thing, that because the treatment requires you to face your fears, it's terrifying, and you'll basically try to find anything else that's treatment besides going to treatment. So I found this neurofeedback that research had shown been kind of helpful with OCD. So I went to, you know, I just really reached this intense point of suffering, so I decided to try neurofeedback. And you have to be careful, because the owner of the neurofeedback place said, oh yes, this will cure you, you'll be all better. And the reality is, the neurofeedback helped take the edge off of the OCD a little bit and give me some mental clarity. And I do believe that because of the neurofeedback is what made me open enough to be able to go to treatment and do ERP. But you know, there's a lot of people who tell you that their insert whatever is going to cure you, and so you have to, you know, do your research and talk to other people who have experienced that, to find out what really is going to help you. So I was really lucky that the person that I worked with at the neurofeedback center, you know, was pretty open and said, I don't think this is going to be your end-all be-all cure, and this may be part of the solution, but you really are going to need to go to therapy. And he also said something that I really did not want to hear at the time. I can still remember sitting in the office, and I don't remember the exact words, but the essence of the message was, you know, you're an adult. You have to accept responsibility for the life that you want to live. And yeah, sometimes things suck, and that's just reality. And I remember sitting in his office in my head, and I was just thinking, please stop talking. I don't want to hear this. But that was actually what I needed to hear to really decide to take the step to change my life and go to treatment. So I signed up for a 3-week intensive outpatient treatment, where basically you go for 3 hours in the morning, work with a therapist, and then you spend the rest of the day doing your own exposures. And it's a really intense, draining process, and it was really terrifying to sign up for, but I signed up for it. And I was kind of lucky because the conference was coming up, the Northwest Yoga Conference, and that kept my mind occupied, so I couldn't focus too much on my fear of going to treatment. But it was really a very hard time, because I was just really at the depths of the suffering with the OCD. I was trying to plan the conference. Now I'm getting a little emotional. Oh, hi, Sam. And then like a month before the event canceled, the event venue canceled, and then I had a national teacher cancel, and there was just, and a lot of people were emailing me about how they were unhappy about the venue change, or unhappy with the person that canceled, and I'm like just in the depths of suffering, and I had to, you know, that's where my yoga and meditation practice really helped me, because when these people would send these messages, you know, honestly, that I have a lot of care for my attendees that come to the conference, but you know, it's pretty deep in suffering, and so to be able to find a space in my heart where I can say I can see their suffering and help them, my yoga meditation was really pivotal for helping me through that time. And you know, I finished up the conference, and within a week I was off to treatment, and my husband wasn't able to come with me because he had to do guiding for his business, and so I brought my dad with me because I really didn't feel like I was strong enough to go on my own. It was just too scary. So yeah, so you know, I share that part of it. That part's a little harder for me to share because it's pretty personal, but because I think a lot of times we just forget, we don't know what's going on in somebody else's life, and I just was just really barely hanging on at that point. And so, you know, just every step of care and compassion and love that you can offer to people, because we just really don't know what's going on in their life. So I always keep that in mind. If I get an email from somebody about the conference and they're a little frustrated about something, I don't know. Who knows what's going on? So just always find that space of love. So yeah, so I went to intensive treatment, and I was really lucky with my therapist. He was actually my age. We had a lot of similar personality things, so we just got along really well, and he had suffered with OCD as well, so I really enjoyed working with him, and I got onto a really good path with that. I did have, I guess you could say, stumbled a bit after going to treatment, and had a little bit of a rough patch, but I at that point had tools that helped me figure out how to get myself back into a healthy place and to work with the OCD. So I was able to go to another therapist, because we move around in our RV, so that was one of the challenges for me with going to treatment. And yeah, and I found another therapist to work with, Rachel, and she was affiliated with the place I went to the intensive treatment with, and I just feel so blessed to have crossed paths with Rachel as well. And she's actually going to be on tomorrow talking just in general about mental health issues and providing a therapist perspective, so be sure to come and check that out. But Rachel had this immense, or she has this immense ability to love, and that is what I really, really needed. And she spoke to me in a way that I would speak to other people, but had lost the ability to speak to myself. So I just, yeah, feel so grateful to have had the opportunity to work with her. And yeah, so now I'm still working on my recovery. I still have to work on exposure stuff. I might have to do it every day for the rest of my life. It's kind of like OCD homework. Sometimes that can be frustrating, because, you know, I don't know, who wants to do that when you can do other things? But the reality is, if you do your exposure and response prevention on a daily basis and create a good habit with it, then you can maintain that space of freedom from the OCD in your life. So it's important to do. One thing that was an interesting experience for me through the OCD and the recovery was my relationship to my yoga and meditation practice. I was really grateful that I found yoga and meditation before the OCD started. A lot of people have OCD that starts in their childhood. For me, it didn't start until my late 20s. And so I had already some really great tools to use, and some mindfulness techniques that I could use, and that was really helpful. But I did notice before the OCD started, I really enjoyed vinyasa yoga practice. But once the OCD started, it was so exhausting and so mentally draining, and just so intense that I didn't like vinyasa anymore. I really needed restorative practices, yin practice, just quietness, things that didn't require a lot of energy. I mean, there's so many obstacles that get placed in your way on a daily, minute-by-minute basis, really, when you have OCD. So things that are really simple and easy are really the greatest tools that you can have in your toolbox. So just real simple meditation practices and breathing and meditation, yoga. But a couple of things that I learned along the way is, you know, I used to use my breath a lot to self-soothe all the anxious feelings that I had with OCD, and that was like the first thing that got taken away from me in treatment, because the reality was I needed to be able to sit with those uncomfortable feelings and not use my breath to calm myself down. And so that's something I really thought about a lot with the yoga practice too. I thought, are we too quick to self-soothe with our practice? And I don't have an answer for you on it, but it's something that I do keep in mind, and I do try to be more open to feeling things that are uncomfortable, whether it's in my yoga practice or in my daily life. So it's just something I think to consider maybe when you're practicing is, can you sit in that uncomfortable feeling maybe a little bit longer? And the other thing is there's a lot of people who post things on social media, like little statements, I don't know what you want to call them, but that once I started treatment, or even during OCD, I was like, I don't know about this, like, you are your thoughts. Well, I'm going to tell you something my therapist said in the intensive treatment right away. It's like, if you are your thoughts, then I'm thinking there's $1 million sitting right outside the door right now, and I'm going to go get that $1 million. I mean, you're not your thoughts, and that's really the reality of the situation. And I think that's where meditation really helps, because you can see the thoughts arise and you don't have to have attachment to them, and you can realize that that's just all they are, they're thoughts. You don't get to choose your thoughts, so you really are not your thoughts, and you do get to choose your behavior. So, and that's what a lot of the OCD recovery is choosing the behavior that you want for a better life. So that, and then there's another one, I see people say a lot, love and fear cannot coexist, or there can't be love without fear. And I also have to just say, I don't believe that to be true either, because every time I do an exposure, especially when I did exposures with my therapist, Rachel, because I just felt her love for me so deeply, her love for wanting me to get better and to help and support me. And so there were many exposures that I was just ridiculously terrified. It was just, my whole fight or flight response is going, and I'm just like in total panic mode, and yet I was able to like have Rachel's love there with me. That I know that helped me to get through that fearful situation. So I've definitely felt love and fear at the same time. And I guess something I hadn't mentioned earlier, I just mentioned the fight or flight response, but that's one of the reasons why OCD can be so tiring, because every time you are exposed to a trigger, your fight or flight response engages, and it's really exhausting on your body. And so I guess all right, I'm looking at my little list. The last couple of things here, I guess, that I want to share is, here I am now sharing my story, and I just want to touch on that. It's taken me a lot to get to this point where I'm openly sharing, and it still makes me really uncomfortable, but I'm doing it. And I think for people out there who have OCD and they're wondering, or maybe some other mental health issue, I think sometimes when you're in the depths of the suffering of it, it may not be the right time to share on a broad scale, because there's just so much going on emotionally, and I think it's good to get to a spot where you have tools and resources and support before maybe sharing on a broad scale. I think it's good to share with a few loved ones, people that you feel like you can count on for some support. For me, my husband, my dad, and my dear friend Darcy really were pretty pivotal people that were really loving and open and generous with their time, and let me come to them when I needed to, and just loved me wholly throughout my whole experience with that. So, if you're somebody who has OCD or another mental health type thing, I would encourage you to reach out and to get help, because the mental health steals your time, and you can't get that back. So the sooner that you can go to get help, the more you get your time back, and you can spend it how you want to spend it. So I really encourage you to go and get help, find a therapist. And I'm going to say that the reality of the situation is you might have to go through a few therapists, and that sucks. I get it. It really sucks to have to show up to a therapist. You have this hope that they're going to be able to help you. You go through the whole initiation process, and then they're not the right fit for you personality-wise, or they're not actually equipped to help you. So I will say, don't give up on trying to find a therapist. There is a right therapist for you out there, and sometimes it does kind of like dating, I guess. You got to go through a few people to get to the right one. So don't give up on that and keep searching for a therapist for you. There's a lot of online options now too, because for some people there's not an option nearby to get help. So yeah, find a therapist, get help. There's also a lot of books out there. I mean, there's a lot of really great books out there that are resources that cover cognitive behavioral therapy. So for some people that might actually even just be enough to find a book that has the resources for you. And you can go on Amazon, see the reviews, find out what ones people are actually finding to be helpful and useful. There's a lot of forums on the internet that you can look for and find books that have been helpful for people. Let's see. Okay, also finding support groups. There's a lot of support groups out there. For me, support groups are really hard because it's hard for me to sit and listen to other people talk. I'm afraid I'm going to get triggered, so that's been a good exposure experience for me, going to support groups. And also practicing self-care, because it is really hard on your body and your system, your mind. So trying to do your best to feed yourself healthy, nutritious food, having some loved ones that can support you, doing some sort of physical activity. It can be really hard to do more intense physical activity, but just even going for walks, getting outside, some meditation or some gentle yoga, just something to move the body a little bit. So just making sure that you take care of yourself. And the thing I think was my most difficult point to get to treatment was because I didn't know if I really should be prioritizing myself. I know that kind of sounds ridiculous, but I think I was waiting for my husband to say, we need to drop everything and get you to treatment. But we had a lot of things in our life to juggle, and that just didn't happen. And I kind of was waiting for that, I think. And at some point, I finally just said, especially after the talk with the guy at the neurofeedback place, like, this is my life. This is my life. What do I want my life to be? So, just accepting that responsibility, recognizing that, and going out there and finding the help so that you can have the life that you want, and that your life isn't run by mental health. If you are somebody who loves somebody that has a mental health struggle, a couple of tips that I have is, first of all, at least for me, one of the most important things for me through that difficult time was just knowing that I had somebody there. I didn't need you to say the right thing. I didn't need you to do the right thing. I just needed you to be there. And so I think keeping that in mind, that not putting too much pressure on yourself, that I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do, just letting that person know that they have somebody there that loves and supports them is really pretty major. So also taking the time to educate yourself, learning about the disorder, learning about what are good behaviors to be helping them with, because especially like with OCD, it's very easy to enable the behavior, and a lot of times families can get involved in the compulsions as well, let's say there's a child and there's something, I don't know, maybe it's a certain tree outside their house that bothers them, and a family member goes and touches that tree and comes into the house, and then they're like, you have to wash your clothes, you have to do this, and and then if they don't, the kid goes into hysterics. So then what happens is they don't want the kid to be crying in hysterics, so they go wash their clothes and give in to those behaviors, and it's really easy to do that. But taking the time to educate yourself on how you can help, and also maybe behaviors to avoid that just kind of feed into the whole thing of OCD is helpful. And also you just have to realize that the person who has the OCD or whatever other mental health, they have to want to help themselves. There's just no amount of pushing that you can do to get them to go get help. Trust me, I know. Because my husband really wanted me to go get help, but I had to get to the point that I was ready to go get help, and that it was something I was willing to prioritize for myself. Um, so it can be frustrating to be the loved one in that situation and have the person not going and getting help. So that's why it's really important for you to take care of yourself too, and to give yourself breaks and space when you need them, and even seeing a therapist yourself and learning some tools and resources can be really helpful. Um, and they do have support groups too for loved ones as well. So that can be really helpful, finding other people who are going through the same thing and learning from each other and just being able to commiserate with somebody else. And let's see, I think that's pretty much it. So if you're watching this and you think that you might have some symptoms of OCD, or you do have OCD and you haven't gotten help yet, you can go check out IOCDF, which is International OCD Foundation's website, and they have therapists listed on there that have some training in OCD type stuff. But yeah, so that's a little bit about my experience, my journey through this ordeal of OCD. I really appreciate you tuning in, and for all the love and support that you guys have been sending. And you know, I think it's just so important for us to, when you're in a place that you can share your story, to do so, because you never know when it's going to help somebody else. And it's also good to help just break down the stigma of mental health, break down the stigma of going to a therapist and getting help. So again, thank you so much for being a part of this journey. And you know, for those of you who've been coming to the conference, you were a part of the journey without even knowing it at that time. But you know, it's always been a treat for me to get to spend the weekend. That's, you know, been a highlight with me, to spend the weekend with so many incredible people and feel everybody's love and support. And this carried me through some hard times. So love to everybody, and thank you for watching and being a part of this conversation. Namaste.